Good morning, Dan.
Oh, you beat me to it. Good morning.
So we've been going through a hiring process recently for the better part of, I'd say, 2 months. This week, I just want to do a singular topic and kind of just discuss the overall hiring process and what we've kind of learned, and maybe that's valuable for a lot of folks out there.
Yeah, I think it could be interesting. I think both for clients, just because they obviously entrust us as a team and as professionals, and I think having an understanding of how we bring people into that group is useful for them, and then for maybe some aspiring financial planners out there, it's useful context, and for maybe some of our peers in the financial planning world already, it's just useful to hear how another firm's doing it. Welcome to the Science of Wealth, where we discuss the science behind financial planning and the art of learning and applying it.
Cool. So I'm just gonna kind of go, as we went through the process, and I have a couple questions for each stage, sort of. So first kind of stage is just applications. So reviewing resumes, reviewing cover letters. What do you kind of see as, essential for a candidate to have when moving to maybe that next step in getting their resume approved? And maybe what are some of the not essential items, but the nice to haves?
So I think some context for anybody who doesn't know this, but we don't use any AI tools during our recruitment process. So we don't have people submit their stuff to like a portal somewhere and then it goes through a magical filter that then only spits out good candidates. We review every single application. So a couple of things here. I think the most important core item here is really just going to be one very specific premise, which is follow the directions. Okay. And that sounds a little bit silly, but a lot of job postings have specific requirements or specific directions for you to follow when you submit your resume, your cover letter, or even just how you're supposed to submit things. Going outside the box, there's a bunch of what I like to call like dumb good ideas out there. You get things like, deliver a box of donuts to the office with your resume taped on the inside or something. Like, that's a lovely, fun sounding idea. Practically speaking, follow the directions. Don't try to get clever or cute with it. It might get you attention, but attention is not always positive. I think the other absolutely mandatory thing is your cover letter and your resume should be both tailored to the position and also impeccable. So that's two separate things. One, when we say tailored to the position, right, you want to do all the smart things like put certain keywords in, use the narrative of your educational or professional background to align to the responsibilities and the things that this job is going to require of you. And then the impeccable part here is just make sure it's not riddled with typos or full of errors. Like every recruitment cycle, we always get a couple applications where people have like first name, last name at emailhost.com as their email address. And I don't mean that as like a fill in the blank template. I mean, like they actually have the template language on their resume or on their cover letter. Or you see things like your address here on resumes and cover letters. So there's just stuff like that where, it's such an unforced error to take 2 seconds to make sure your stuff is correct before you submit it. Because when you submit that empty thing, I know it's a mistake. I know you didn't do it intentionally, but it just makes you look careless and is pretty much disqualifying out of the gate.
For anyone listening, this might seem like such a trivial thing to even mention, but we had a couple people come through and this came up more than once, and it comes back to, I think a couple episodes ago, we kind of talked about, there's folks out there complaining that maybe they're applying to hundreds of jobs, and I get it. Applying to jobs is not fun. Getting a job is difficult, but it's a quality over quantity thing, and you can tell some of the people who applied for this job, like, I can tell what they're doing. They're taking their resume, they're copying their resume into wherever we decide to tell them to upload it. They have a cover letter, and then that has insert name. They put the name of our firm, and then they send it in, and they hope and pray that they'll get somebody that is interested in meeting with them. And we can see that pretty clearly from a mile away. It doesn't take, it takes an incremental amount of effort to customize it and make it tailored to our specific role, our specific position. But, I thought that was something everybody knew to do, and I guess it's not, which is interesting.
Well, and there's a difference here between like a small business or a small firm like ours, where all three employees, our names and faces are on the website, versus like applying to Google, right, or Fidelity or some big mega corporation. But there's some really basic stuff here. You know, if you go and look at our firm and look at the job posting and see, oh, there's three people here, you can write your cover letter to Dear Dr. Daniel, Daniel, and Stephanie. Right, like that takes you almost no time at all to research and do. But when you write your letter to your hiring manager, you know, that makes it look like a template, even if it's not a template. Another thing we had, for example, in our job posting, we included two requirements actually for the cover letter. One is that you had to use the phrase old fashioned. And that was literally just to ensure that this person had actually read through the job posting instead of just bulk submitting. And then we also, to try to catch AI, because AI and templates tend to use the same language, specifically said, please do not use phrases like, you know, working in an innovative, fast-paced, thought-leading firm like yours or something like that. Because, again, a lot of templates like to use this fluffy universal language, but, like, we're not a tech company. We're not a fast-moving innovator. You know, there's no reason you would say that if you actually meant it or actually were writing to us. So it just helps us identify who is using a template or who is using AI versus who is actually reading the directions and submitting a genuine cover letter, a genuine resume.
Yeah, no, I get it. So, you know, one of the things that I get hung up on is, right, this is an entry-level role, and we are hiring for hopefully somebody who would like to be here long-term. So while we are hiring for entry-level today, we're also looking at these candidates and saying, okay, is this somebody we'd want to work with maybe longer-term? That being said, like, we had some candidates who came in who had direct financial planning experience, right? So they're either doing or have satisfied their CFP coursework, or maybe they're in a personal financial planning program at school and they're going to be graduating with a degree in personal financial planning, or they have internships or some sort of experience. But like, how are we weighing that experience versus somebody who maybe doesn't have that experience and has maybe like financial planning adjacent experience, call it accounting, corporate finance, or even a career changer? You know, how do we kind of weigh the transferable experience versus like the hands-on experience that some of them may have had?
I think it's a really good question. There's sort of a two-tiered piece to this. There's the part where it helps you and the part where it hurts you. The part where it helps you is if you have financial planning experience directly, you know, whether it's internships, working at a financial services company, whatever it is, that's an immediate green flag, right? Because it's a niche part of finance to begin with. There's a lot of, you know, stuff where we get lots of applications from that general business category that you described, and not all of them really understand what they're applying to. Like, they don't really know the difference between us and a Goldman Sachs other than size or reputation. They don't really understand, you know, whether we're a fund manager or a financial planning firm or an investment bank or something like that. So that direct experience is really, really helpful at the application and resume phase. The place where it hurts you, and this gets a little bit further onto the process, is when I see that you have that formal education or that formal experience in financial planning, right? You have a degree in financial planning, you finish your CFP courses, whatever it is. I have expectations of you, which is that when I ask you a financial planning question, I expect you to either know the answer or at least be able to talk through the contextual cues to get into the right neighborhood of the answer. But if you say you have a financial planning education, and I ask you a financial planning question and you are caught flat-footed, then that gives me zero confidence in you. Whereas if you're from that general business category where maybe you studied finance, accounting, I don't have an expectation that you're going to understand the niche errata of financial planning yet, but I'm going to look for you to be problem solving and talk me through your process or how you're going to solve for that issue. So it's beneficial to get in the door for the interview in the first place, but it sets a higher expectation on you. Because, as they like to say, right, who do you call the bottom of the class from medical school? You call them a doctor. Same thing in financial planning. Just because you have the degree or just because you have the certifications or just because you did an internship doesn't mean you learned anything.
If I'm listening and I don't have that experience, right, as you said, you can talk through how you solve the problem. But in general, your interview is just maybe not at a disadvantage, but there are other people who maybe have a little bit of a head start. That being said, how do you punch above your weight relative to people who do have the transferable experience if you don't?
You need to show problem-solving capability. I like to say that there's two kinds of people in the world. There are problem-oriented people and there are solution-oriented people. Problem-oriented people are great at telling you why something is wrong or broken or isn't working, but they have no suggestions or gumption or motivation to solve that problem. Solutions-oriented people can recognize a problem and they can tell you about the problem, but they are much more interested in saying, I see this problem, I think what we should do is this, or I think the way that we should work around this is this. So if you don't have the technical knowledge, right, there's sort of this classic thing, which is, I don't know the answer to that question, but I'll research it and get it back to you. We have to do that in financial planning all the time. There's just far too many specific individualized circumstances. So if you're an accounting background, general business, general finance, whatever it is, and you're faced with a financial planning problem and you don't know the answer, you can say, I don't know the answer. Here's how I would go about solving that problem or getting the answer. That's a perfectly valid answer. It's not as strong as having the answer, but it's better than saying, I don't know, or even worse, trying to BS your way to the wrong answer.
All right, so we have candidates, good cover letter, good resume. They use the word old-fashioned, etc. So we had an intermediary kind of step between interviewing them and approving their resumes and cover letters. So we asked them to send us a 5-minute video, right? Kind of asking them, okay, why us? Why us specifically? And we had a little bit of like a semi-case study for them to kind of just walk through. There were specific instructions, I believe, right, to not have it go over 5 minutes, and that was about it. Let's talk about this a little bit, because I think this was one of those that I thought was a layup, right? We're giving them a stipulated period of time to make this video, right? So you can make it as great as you'd like. And I'd say some of them were not all that great. So, let's start with the good, and then we can go toward the bad. When someone had a really good video and impressed us in 5 minutes, what were they doing to really impress us?
So, first and foremost here, I think even before we talk about the content of the video, let's just talk about the setup there. Because as you said, right, it should be a layup. It's a thing where you can essentially do it over and over and over again until you have your best possible product, as it were. Recognizing there's a risk-reward thing here, you're one of many candidates. If you spend 30 hours on this thing and you don't get moved on to the interview, what a waste of time. But it's a pass-fail activity, so I want to highlight that here. There's some basic things here. Number one, this is, you should treat this like the interview itself, insofar as you should be showing up dressed professionally. You should be using a neutral background. You should not be doing this in public or in a space that is busy or active. So for example, we saw some applications where people were clearly filming it like in hallway. One guy was filming it in a locker room. There's just stuff like that is not conducive to putting your best foot forward. And then the other thing, before we even get into the substance of the content of the answers to the questions of things you're supposed to do in the video, if it's not good for any reason, right? Your cat runs across your lap, your cell phone rings in the middle of the video, you suddenly have a coughing fit, like whatever it is that makes your video suddenly not perfect or the best version of itself, stop and do it again, or stop, clear whatever the issue or the obstacle is, and then continue recording, and then clip out whatever that thing was. It's okay if there's a couple little like jump cuts in the video or something, but if you submit a video where you are suddenly just like coughing your brains out into the microphone for 15 seconds and you leave that in the video, again, there's just sort of this professional judgment thing. We're not judging you for being human and having a cough. We're judging the fact that you thought that was the best thing or the best use of our time to watch you cough your brains out. Or to give other examples here, scratch your private parts, take a cell phone call, talk to your roommate, like all sorts of different stuff that people did where it's just like you're sitting here as the viewer of the video going, what are you doing?
Yeah, it seems like somehow we started with the bad, and I guess we'll transfer to the good later. But even on that, like, I think there was someone who interviewed or didn't interview. They had a video, and it wasn't bad. Like, it was one of the earlier ones we got, so our baseline was still kind of fuzzy. And I remember the person wasn't dressed professionally, but like the content of the video was adequate at the time. And I remember you asked me, you're like, oh, like, do you think we should let them go forward? And you kind of pushed back a little bit because you're like, oh, the video wasn't bad. Why wouldn't you let them go forward? And I was like, I'm not letting them go forward because they didn't dress professionally, and they made the excuse that they were like doing this between some sort of extracurricular and class. And it's like, look, you can control the things you can control. I'm sure this student has a bed they go to sleep in at night. They could have filmed the video 10 minutes before they went to sleep, slapped on a polo, and made it then. But they made the decision to do it in between classes and in between extracurriculars, which in turn made them show up in a sweatshirt. So it's like, cool, you thought that was appropriate. I do not think that is appropriate. Denied. Like, you can control that. And I think that was something that came up a couple times, right? Is your background professional? Are you professional? Am I looking up your nose? These are things that we don't want to see. And not only do I not want to see it, it reflects poorly on your judgment if you think it's appropriate to convey that to us, which it was interesting. So I'd say those are some of the standouts or callouts, at least from a presentation standpoint, on the poor videos, but like the good ones. Let's focus on those for a little bit. Like, how did somebody come across strongly? What were they doing? What did they sound like? Did they do anything differently?
So for anybody who did not read our job posting or who was not one of our candidates or something, I'll just give the context on what we asked from the video. So, beyond just showing up professionally, doing all the things you should be doing in the submission, we asked them to spend about a minute telling us about themselves, about a minute explaining why they want to work in person at My Wealth Planners, a minute on our business model, and then about 2 minutes on a case study, and we can get into the details of the case study in a little bit here, but that was the basic setup. 5 minutes, 1 minute for 3 things, 2 minutes for the thing that might take you a little while to talk your way through. So first and foremost, the basic thing that was going to just do well here is that somebody conformed to those guidelines reasonably well. Doesn't mean they had to stop hard at a minute for the first 3 sections and could only spend 2 minutes, but the basic idea here is, take a minute to tell us your personal story. I am from this area. I'm going to school here. I'm interested in financial planning because of this. Whatever it is, help me get to, know you and empathize with you directly. The minute about the firm, we saw responses that were good, where people were essentially able to say, I live in this area. I want to live in this area. I think the fact that you guys focus on local and community impact so much is really cool. I want to have that kind of impact. And when we got to the business model portion of it, it was more than superficial, right? We got a lot of responses where it's your business model is you're a financial planning firm and you're fee only. Neat. That describes a couple thousand firms. Can you tell me how we do financial planning? Can you tell me about, our net worth based fee calculation? Can you, talk about our service cycle? Can you tell me anything more than you are a planning firm? So it really was, using the guidelines for those 3 sections and going beyond superficial details in the questions about the firm and the opportunity, and using that first minute to develop rapport and empathy with you. I think one really bad answer to that first part about tell us about yourself is somebody essentially said, you've already got my resume, so I'm just going to skip this question and move on to question 2. Terrible decision. Not because I can't read your resume or read your cover letter, but because I gave you a minute to build rapport with me as your audience, to help me get to know you and like you as an individual before you move on to the more technical, direct job-seeking aspects of this.
Yeah, I think another crazy thing too is enthusiasm. And that doesn't mean you have to be smiling the entire 5-minute conversation, but it means you shouldn't sound like this. I don't know. This is your chance to, as you said, treat it like an interview. Some of these kids, it's this might be the least most interesting part of your day because clearly you do not care to be here. But then there were others who showed up very enthusiastically. They seemed passionate about wanting to work here, and they could be faking that, but good. This is the time to do it before, you get yourself to the next step at least. You can control it. It's on a video, And some of these folks did a really good job of that. And then others, I was kind of just disappointed because it's oh, wow, this might, I don't think you actually care about this. Or even if you're saying all the right things, it's not exactly what you say, it's also how you say it. And, I think that was an interesting takeaway from some of the videos as well.
I think energy level is a really good call out. And it actually reminds me particularly of 2 particular things we saw. One is this: you should probably script this video. You should write out your responses and your answers. You should proofread it. You should, say it out loud to listen for kind of verbal clunkiness, etc. But quite critically here, you can write your script and you can use a teleprompting app or something like that, or whatever you can to make it as easy for you to sort of look at the camera as you read the script. But it's really important that you don't sound like you're reading a script, right? Writing a script and kind of working through it and practicing it is a sign of good preparation. But then when it comes to the deliverable, you should not sound like you are reading the words on the page over here, or you should not be doing a thing where you talk to the camera and then you kind of pause and look 30 degrees to your right and then come back and start talking again and then pause and look again to the right, just because, again, there's sort of this well-crafted illusion thing of just basic presentation skills. It should not look like you're reading a script. And then the other thing is, and I'm going to be a little bit mean here, guys, I'm going to pick on you for a second. There's a thing particularly that I've seen, and not in interviewing for jobs, but interviewing for boards, where when boards of directors interview potential candidates to join the board, there's a common observation, which is rambling answers indicate a lack of preparation. And what I saw between energy and scripting issues is a lot of guys, specifically when they do their video submissions, kind of have this, kind of kick back thing, and like it'd be cool, like, to work there or whatever. It'd be really, really sick. And it's just this sort of general apathy energy that shows, again, that you're not very well prepared or not very well engaged, but also perhaps even more importantly, that you didn't prepare. And so that's something where, again, energy is something that's hard to fake. Practice helps with it quite a bit, but it is very important that you show up like you are not just recording this cold without having given it any thought before you started.
Yeah, I mean, I think I vividly remember one person kind of doing that, lean back in the chair. So yeah, no, that's how I'd go about answering it. Yeah, thanks. And I was like, all right, like I'm out. The Shark Tank, like I'm out on that guy. I'm not interested anymore. Too casual, not happening. Also, like in that context, like we asked them to do a 1 minute kind of case study. There were some people who like got it wrong, and like, look, I'm not saying you should cheat or literally just look the answer up, read off a website, but it took me about 5 seconds to like go into we went on AI and said, okay, like answer the question. Even if you did that, put it in your own words, memorize the answer, like you can do that. And some people didn't. Like, they got the question wrong. Like, is there any excuse for that, or am I over-exaggerating here?
No, and we can go back to the principle of the sort of AI and, like, is it cheating or something, right? At the stage of this video submission, right, you're not in a live interview, there is no excuse for giving a wrong answer. Now, again, there's two approaches, and we touched on this earlier. If you know the answer, you know the answer. If you research the answer and you're 99% sure you should give the answer. If you don't know the answer and you're not capable of finding the answer for whatever reason, right? It's too difficult, it's too esoteric, the resources you're looking at are giving you contradictory information, whatever it is, then your second best answer is to say, I'm not sure of the answer to this, right? But here is how I would go about finding the answer to this, right? And one of our best candidates who made it onto the interview phase essentially said, up front, I didn't study this in school. I don't know the answer to the subject. However, from my research, what I found is this, and it was the correct answer, right? So there's something to be said for, again, solution orientation versus problem orientation.
All right. Well, it's enough beating up on the interview, the videos. Moving to the interview, right? So people will submit a video. It's good. We're interested. We're going to have an interview with them. I think before I even get into like what separated some of the really good interviews from just the average, I'm curious for your take on the in-person interviews versus we had Zoom interviews as well, right? So like, at least in my head, like if you're interviewing on Zoom, you can have some stuff in front of you versus if you're interviewing in person, you're with us. Like we're in this room together. You're not looking at notes for every question. Do you consider that when we're interviewing people?
I don't. I think there's pros and cons to both environments. The pro of being in person is that you are in a distraction-free environment, or any distractions that occur are not going to be your fault. It's also easier to be empathized with in person, right? Human connection is easier to make in person than over Zoom. Conversely, the nice thing about Zoom is, not to encourage people to cheat, but right, you can have notes, you can have resources, you can have some stuff here that helps you, or you can have the company's website in front of you, or like whatever it is that you think is going to be helpful for you in this process. In turn, you have to sort of overdo the personal connection factors a little bit to try to make up for the fact that on a human level, you're just a head in a little box on a screen. So that's sort of the push-pull of where I think there are pros and cons to both sides, right? Remote interviews, easier to have resources, but it's harder to build personal connection. In person, it's easier to build personal connection. You're also on an island. You are trapped in the room with your interviewer, and you really can't, create space for yourself in that environment.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. So we had a spectrum of interviews, I'd say, from really good to less than okay. So like let's start with some of the great ones. What the funny thing is like I think we talked about this, like you can tell a couple minutes in how the interview is going to go. Like, and sure, there are people who I think got better as the interview progressed, and I became infinitely more impressed throughout the interview. But for the most part, like, the opinion we created, I think, or at least I did, in the first kind of 4 or 5 minutes was the opinion I left with 30 minutes later. They really do say, like, you get one chance at making a first impression, and especially for, like, the in-person interviews where we're meeting them for the first time in person, I think it was really true. Like, I could tell 3 minutes in, oh, wow, this candidate really knows their stuff. This is going to be a useful interview for both of us in this context. And then there's others. I was like 2 minutes in, I'm like, oh, no, you're not getting the job. Am I wrong there? Like, am I being a little too judgmental in this regard?
I don't think you're being too judgmental. I do think there's actually a middle group, which is people who start off well, who then fall off. What we didn't see in this interviewing process, we didn't see somebody start weak and get better in a substantial sense. We saw people either stay at a consistent level from start to finish, or one or two people started strong and then it sort of tapered down, and they kind of fell behind the curve in the conversation after a couple of minutes or after a couple of questions. I can make there was only one candidate in the entire process. There were two, but there was only one candidate throughout most of the process where, we got about maybe a third of the way into it. And I was like, okay, I'm okay. And then they had one answer, and I was like, that answer is disqualifying. Still went through the interview, still tried to give them an opportunity to build up ground. But it wasn't that their answer itself, like the words they chose, wasn't disqualifying. It was the affect and attitude with which they presented the answer, where they seemed to get a little too comfortable, and suddenly they just started giving answers and acting like, yeah, I might take this job. This might be okay for me. It's a step on my path, but whatever, we'll see how I feel about it. And say, okay, acting like this opportunity is beneath you, not endearing. I think the only other one where it was sort of an automatic decline from minute 2, you're going to know the one I'm thinking of, Daniel, but I mean, it was just rough. It was rough from minute 1. I think they were just incredibly nervous, and they just never recovered throughout the course of the interview.
Should you lie in an interview? Right. So you just said kind of like, oh, this is a stepping path along my way. Like we do ask some of these people, like, oh, do you think you'll be here long term? We don't ask it exactly like that, but you get what I'm saying. Like if I say I'm interviewing, I came here about 1.5 years, almost 2 years ago. Like, say 2 years ago when I was interviewing, I was like, all right, this is going to be a 3-year thing for me, and then I'm out. But I really wanted the job. Is it worth it for me to how do you navigate that in an interview? And I don't like lying, but at the same time, if you want the job, it's not wise to say, oh, it's a stepping stone, 3 years, and then I'm out.
I think the framing of your question here about whether you should lie or not belies the fact there's a lot of gray area in life, right? So, if I say, do you want to take this job? And by the way, are you going to stick at this job for the rest of your life? That's an unfair question, in the same way then that you might say, well, if you want to get the job, you should lie and say, of course, I'll be there for the rest of my life. I would never quit. So I think we have to acknowledge that there's a very healthy gray area, particularly because we're recruiting for entry-level positions here. We're asking a lot of our candidates who are early in their careers, early in their lives, to potentially make a serious commitment, and in so doing, recognizing that they may not be married, they may not have children yet, they may be married, they may have children, they may have partners or life factors or family things that are going to make their answer change over time. So I don't think it's fair to ask people like, hey, are you willing to pledge your fealty forever? I think in that sense, though, to the more nuanced part of your question, I think it's important to not give answers that are disqualifying, right? So it's one thing if you apply to a job that says this is a 6-month contract position and you're going to be in, you're going to be out, and to be able to say I'm okay with that, or I'm really hoping that this job does extend into a longer term opportunity, but I recognize it won't. In turn, right, when the job is essentially a job in perpetuity, assuming you perform well and grow and develop and all of that, you should probably not be going into the job saying yes, my intention is to work here for 1 year and then I'm going to leave and do something else. Okay, well, we're trying to hire for a long-term fit. So when you come in and just say yes, my intention is to use you and then leave, not really a good alignment or fit. Appreciate the honesty, but it's different when you just say hey, I'm interested in this opportunity as a long-term opportunity, but life could happen. I think that's a fair answer. So I think you do just need to thread the needle between immediately disqualifying answers, but also don't just lie outright to get the job, because when you get caught in that, your relationship with that firm or with that employer is going to be ruined anyway.
So we had a couple really great candidates, right? I think they come across really well. They answer the questions more than adequately, and we liked them. Like, can you just talk a little bit more about some of the great candidates and maybe some of the similarities or characteristics that we found and what kind of let them stand out from the pack?
Yeah, I think I'll say the top 4 or top 5 candidates, strong communicators, right? Good interpersonal skills, able to build personal connection. I think answered every question adequately, and I think even more importantly than answering the questions adequately, when it was their turn to ask questions, they asked detailed questions. It wasn't just like, so when does the job start? What's the salary range? How does vacation days work, right? But they're asking questions about like our values. They're asking questions about how we do community impact. They're asking questions about the long-term future of the firm and how we see it growing and developing. They're getting into the nitty-gritty of the business model or things like that. Because these questions have demonstrated not only that they've done their homework, but also that they have done enough thinking about what they've already discovered to determine things that are important or matter to them. So we got interesting questions about like, hey, your pay scales, you say in the job posting and your comp guide, they adjust by inflation. This particular number has changed. Is that going to be how your pay scale changes in 2026? Super technical call out, but a really, really great, curious question. Another candidate really wanted to talk to us about how our work impacts underserved communities, right? Another candidate made it pretty clear that their really big focus in pursuing the opportunity is that their mission, the reason they want to be a financial planner, is to serve underserved communities, right? So it's going beyond superficial yes, no, thumbs up, thumbs down answers to questions and really engaging in more of a dialogue than a Q&A session.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think another thing that's like an important call out here is something I noticed between like the really good candidates or great candidates and like some of the poor ones is it's important to prepare. There's no denying that. I agree. But you need to also prepare to have a question that's asked of you that you don't have the answer to, right? Like that's okay. You should prepare for that and be comfortable in that space. Like if you think you're going to prepare for an interview and have the answer readily available for every question, you're doing it wrong. You need to prepare enough to have those answers, right? So if I ask you to tell me about yourself, you know what you're going to say and whatnot. But like you should also be prepared that there will be a time in this interview in which they ask me a question and I don't know the answer. What you see the really bad candidates do, or just the bad candidates or even average ones, is they like talk themselves into finding the answer. So like they'll just start talking. And they're like, I'm going to keep doing this and hopefully somewhere in the second or third sentence, I'll figure out what I'm really trying to say here. But I didn't think about this before I started saying it. And I'm hoping the answer is just going to kind of come to me so that by the end of me talking, it sounds like I said something smart. There's nothing wrong. And I think it's actually impressive when someone does this is like, ooh, that's like a really good question. Do you mind if I take a second to think about how I'm going to answer that? Or, something along those lines. Shows you're actually thinking before you speak, which is a valuable thing to do. And then it gives you the actual time to think of an answer, as opposed to kind of just like BSing your way through something and hoping that you have a couple keywords and good things said in your sentence structures. And I think that's something the good candidates or the great candidates do is they actually take a second to think. Like I almost get turned off when we would ask someone a question and they immediately start talking. It's like, oh wow, that you either had that response canned or you're just trying to fill the space or don't feel comfortable with the silence. But there's nothing wrong with taking 2 or 3 seconds or 5 seconds even, I don't care, and genuinely thinking through the answer. I'm more impressed by the people that did that.
I'll also agree with that, but I'll make 2 caveats to that. Number 1, you only get 1 or 2 of those per interview. You can't just say, like, let me think about that to every single question, because at some point, like, you just got to be able to answer a question at certain times. The other thing is if you really need it, right? So like we had a case study question and we had 1 or 2 people who like really had to sit there and just like chew on it for a second. You can give silence maybe 15 to 20 seconds of thinking before you gotta at least start putting something out there. We had one candidate who I think we sat there for probably 3 minutes before I eventually said like, why don't we go ahead and just move on to the next question? because they quite clearly just did not have an answer, didn't know the answer, and they were too scared to say, I don't know. So they were just sort of trapped in like thinking about it limbo. You do have to be able to move the conversation on, not so much because of the importance or lack of importance to the answer to the question, so much as, again, you have to remember there's a human element to this. You're trying to build personal rapport. You're trying to get buy-in from us into you as an individual. And if you make it too awkward, you start hurting that emotional connection and relationship that we're building simply by creating this discomfort. So be mindful not only that you need to have good answers, prepared for answers, and as Daniel's just highlighted, be prepared to answer a question you don't have an answer to, but you also need to remember the tempo of this conversation is an important part of it.
Yeah, don't sit there for a minute. It is awkward. I will tell you from experience. So, all right, yeah, I think that kind of wraps things up. I think the last thing is like post-interview, post-video, whatever. You said earlier, like, don't think outside the box. Don't send us your resume in the mail. Don't try to bring it in person with, a dozen donuts or anything. But what about, like, follow-up? Like, would you get out of the box a little bit there and maybe, like, I don't know, call the office and thank them for the interview, or maybe send them a video thanking them for their time? Or would you just stick to the regular templated kind of just thank you for your time, the interview was enlightening? Or would you even add maybe like things you learned from the interview, or try to answer maybe some of the technical questions you didn't know during the interview? Like, how would you kind of, do you find value in personalizing that at all?
I do. I think it's valuable to send the follow-up email. I think it's better if it's more than just thanks for your time. However, because you brought up the example here of like trying to solve the technical thing, if you're going to try to redo one of your answers to a question from the interview, two things have to happen here. One, if it's a technical, your redo better be right? Because if you got it wrong the first time and then you tell me like, well, now that I had an open book opportunity to really go find the answer for you, the answer, that answer better be right. Do not present me with the wrong answer twice in a row. The second thing that goes with that is any follow-up things or follow-through things should fit the spirit of the conversation you had. So like if you had a really interesting question for us during your opportunity to ask questions, we had a dialogue, but maybe we ran out of time or something like that, and you want to follow through on that and say like, I thought it was really interesting when you said that this thing or that thing. I think that's a good way to sort of build rapport again, but be mindful again of sort of the spirit of the thing. Don't comment on things just for the sake of commenting on things, because if there's not a good sort of, I'll say again, kind of emotional basis for that outreach, then it's sort of like being like, I really liked your blue jacket. Thanks. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. So just being mindful that, that follow-up is valuable. It's good to do. It's almost expected in a certain way, but that you need to, again, tailor it. Don't just send a form like, thanks, it was nice to meet you. Pull out those highlight moments or those interesting moments from the conversation and use those to kind of get one more Hail Mary at building a little bit more emotional investment in you as a candidate.
Cool. Yeah, I kind of agree there. So I think there's a lot of good advice and takeaways and stuff in there, but I'm curious, like for us, like from this hiring cycle, like would you say there's anything, that maybe we didn't fully appreciate before, having now gone through this again?
I think as with many things, and this actually kind of makes me think of like experimental design, it's remarkable how much candidates will fixate on something given a certain choice or selection of words. So, for example, one of our things in the interview process was we asked candidates to role play essentially just like a client conversation with us. And we thought, particularly in the earlier interviews, we thought the language of the question prompting them to do this thing was pretty clear. And then we watched multiple candidates not role play and instead do like a third person description of the thing. And we had to sort of overemphasize it going forward. We had to say like, you were the financial planner. I am the client. Speaking to me directly as your client, please do this thing. Like we had to really lay it on thick to get them to do it for the rest of the interviews, because when it was just stated in the same tone or tenor as the other questions, we saw a lot of people being like, well, what I would do is talk to you like this. And it's like, no. I want to see you do the thing. So it's something where, I think there's always room for improvement and sort of keeping notes or carrying through particular notes and saying, okay, you can write down the questions, you can have your rubric, you can have your filters, but watch the behavior of your applicants. If 90% of them are doing something specifically wrong, that's probably not an applicant problem. That's probably your posting or your question problem.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think that's an important thing to just be cognizant of in future hires. But on that note, is there anything from this cycle in addition to that you think we'd be doing differently, moving forward?
I frankly actually liked the process here. If there's anything in particular, it's that I'm going to have to ignore industry terminology because we had an issue during this hiring cycle where, our job positions internally are called wealth planner, right? Associate wealth planner, wealth planning analyst, lead wealth planner, etc. Industry likes to use the term financial planner because certified financial planner, financial planning is the more industry language. But when we did the initial job posting, we used the phrase financial planning analyst, and we got a huge amount of interest from outside of financial planning parties, where people are looking for corporate FP&A jobs or that sort of thing. And so that's just something where in our attempt to use industry language, we ended up attracting a lot of interest from candidates who are not really predisposed or well qualified for what we were looking for.
Cool. Yeah, sounds like a lot of just small details in the language. So for other small financial planning firms out there, do you think there's anything they can learn or kind of take away from our experience to maybe refine their own process as well?
I think clarity is kindness. I think things that we've always done really well is, again, kind of the human filtering versus using AI or using tools. I know it's a lot of work, but I think you can get some real diamonds that slip through if you take the time to look for them, as opposed to relying on AI or tools to find candidates. And I think in turn, right, be really open about your top of funnel, right? Go ahead and try to attract as many potential applicants as you can. Use inviting language, reduce the number of requirements for your position other than the absolutely essential, and then feel free to include preferences, but really do everything you can to give yourself a large candidate pool to start with, and then be mindful as you go through the process that your candidate pool establishes its own baseline. Don't come in with a hard and fast, we'll only hire somebody who is a 9 of 10 in every single dimension. Recognize that your candidate pool is going to be a better tool for helping you understand. I'm not really looking for a 9 of 10 in every dimension. I'm actually really just looking for somebody who, in the aggregation of everything I'm thinking about, is my candidate on the far right side of the distribution. I think that's a more meaningful way to approach your hiring instead of looking for a perfect unicorn to come through the door.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. What about lastly for folks applying for these jobs, whether it's applying for a future financial planning entry-level position here or somewhere else along your career journey? Is there any takeaways or final pieces of advice you'd give to some folks out there?
We touched on this in podcasts recently as we were going through the application, hiring, recruitment process, and so on. And it's this. Daniel touched on it earlier. It is a quality, not a quantity thing. That doesn't mean you won't have to submit dozens or hundreds of applications or resumes to get a job somewhere. But just very, very importantly here, if you are 30 feet from the plate, every time you take a swing, you are never going to get a home run. And so it is very important at the application, resume, cover letter phase that you put the time, energy, and attention into it that it deserves to get past that to an interview or to a video submission. When you have a video submission, again, you have to put the time, energy, and effort into it that it deserves to get to the interview. When you're going for the interview, it doesn't matter if you're one of 30 people they're interviewing where the odds are kind of against you. You have to put in the work at every single stage to show up well enough to move on to the next stage. And when it comes time to make a decision, for you to be the obvious choice. It is super easy to put in average effort. And the problem is the average candidate, as Daniel has said here before, does not get the job. It is the exceptional person on the end of the distribution who gets the offer.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I like that. I got nothing else for you.
All right. Well, Daniel, you know how I'm going to wrap this up, and maybe you have your own take or your own insight across the whole conversation here to share. But what do you think is important for our audience to hear from this conversation, or that you've had in the past week?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's probably worth, just given the topic for this conversation, to probably gear it toward something more interview related. But I think it's such an undervalued skill, and we talked about it today, but just in general in life, but especially in an interview process is like your ability to communicate. Like, seriously. Like, if you haven't practiced a mock interview and recorded yourself doing so to see what you sound like and the tendencies in which you have and maybe your stutter patterns, etc., you're not doing it. You're not doing it right. The person who communicates more effectively, all else being equal, is going to win. And not in an interview setting alone, but like just in life, right? If you can convey the things you need, the things you want to a spouse, to a boss, to your friends and family, right, to your kids, you're gonna be better off in life. And a lot of people fumble over their words, or they know what they want to say in their head, but they can't figure out how to get it across to the other person on the other side of the table. And your communication style comes over verbally, but it also comes over in the way that you email and in the way that you make a resume and in the way that you respond to certain things and in the way you ask questions. And there are so many people that, they're shaking my hand and they're not looking me in the eye, or, they kind of just putter to themselves when they're walking out the door, or mumble about having a nice day, or, they're just looking at you if you ask the question in an interview and not kind of doing a sequence between looking at me, looking at Stephanie, looking at you. They kind of fiddle with their hands a little bit. Like, that all is communication, even if you're not speaking directly, right? And I think that's just such an undervalued skill. And it's one of those things. We've said it before. I'll say it again. You can't control what they say about you when you're not in a room. You can't control, to a certain extent, what you look like, right? You can't control, at least at this point in time, the experiences in which you've had in the past. But you can control, how you speak, control how you present yourself. And if you're not firing on all cylinders to make sure the things you can control, you're doing to the best of your ability, or at least putting in the effort, it's like, yeah, you're not going to get the job, and you'll get the mediocre job, because the mediocre job gets mediocre candidates. But like, if that's not what you're looking for, don't expect more.
I think my answer succinctly would have been, gentlemen, get a haircut. But hey, that's good wisdom too.
When I applied to my first internship in college, at the time, my hair was like pretty much almost down to like my neck. Like, it was pretty long, and this was my second semester of freshman year of college. And I didn't like tell anybody. Like, it was like that the entire time my freshman year of college. Like, it was very long. And one day I just like got a haircut, and I didn't tell anybody. And like, there were people that genuinely for a couple of days like didn't recognize me. They're like, "Oh, we haven't seen you in class." I'm like, I'm sitting in the back, and I'm like, "Yeah, I just got a haircut." And they're like, "Holy crap, we didn't even see you." But like, I'm not saying that's like a super crazy level of commitment. It's like table stakes. Like, get a haircut, guys. Like, I don't understand. You can shave. Like, shaving is a valuable thing to do just for personal hygiene. It's a really good thing to do for an interview, and those are totally within your control. That's all I got. Yeah.
Well, there it is. Show up well, communicate well, and we are in agreement. Get a haircut.
Take care, Dan.
The Science of Wealth is produced by My Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor in Colorado. The theme song is This Is Your Time by Dan Phillips. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not investment advice or any other form of advice. Not all material discussed on the podcast is appropriate for every individual in every circumstance, so you should consult with a certified financial planner, tax professional, or legal professional as appropriate before attempting to apply any of the subjects, strategies, or tactics discussed on the podcast.